In the greater scheme of things, the stories we hear have the potential to hold a lot of meaning, provided we are diligent and willing to look a little below the surface. The past holds information that's relevant for us today. Caught in the very human trap of foresight and hindsight, we struggle for understanding and relief. Why is spirituality so prominent in our daily lives in the world today? Are all the religions and beliefs of the ages misguided and wrong, worthy of contempt? Or is there some wisdom to be found? Hopefully this podcast will go some way in trying to give a little perspective on these ideas. I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you. I'm quite fascinated by Greek mythology. I like Greek mythology. And I want to talk just a little bit about Greek mythology. But please just take into account that my resources are Wikipedia and Plato, of all people. So, in compiling this stuff, I've gone into a reasonable amount of depth of trying to understand how this stuff all fits together, and it's very complicated. There are so many role players, and they all have functions and represent certain things, and there's a cross matching of things, and then of course the resources for all of this stuff is very. I mean, we're talking about the belief systems that were in play 2,000-3,000 years ago. The time when Plato was around and when he was writing things, it was 320 BC. So that's quite a few years ago. And the little bits of writing here and there that have been put together, and poems that were written and stories that were written, like the Iliad and Homer's Odyssey and those kind of things. That's where they try and keep track of all of this stuff, but it's really, and then of course it's all mixed up with Roman mythology as well. There's a whole lot of cross-pollination there. And then something that is also quite interesting is a lot of these stories are also carried through in other philosophical and religious traditions, like in India and places like that, where they had a lot of the same kind of belief systems. So the story starts with Uranus and Gaia. Uranus, I always used, when I used to think about Uranus, I always thought that the naming of the planet Uranus was something that was done thousands of years ago, when they saw Uranus in the sky, and that was part of the belief system. It's actually the other way around. If you'll remember that it was thought that Earth was the center of the universe, and depending how far you go back, that the stars were little holes poked into a blanket that shone through. And it was actually when things like the telescope were invented, where people could look at the stars and see where the stars were, that they started naming the planets after the gods in ancient history, like Saturn. It was a Roman god. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm not 100% sure on this, so don't quote me, but I think Saturnus and Uranus had kind of the same position in the different mythologies. So with the Greek mythology, it was Uranus, and the Roman mythology, it was Saturn or Neptune. There are so many of these names. It's really, really difficult to keep track of everything. Now, Uranus's role in Greek mythologies, he was the god of the sky and the ruler of the cosmos. So standing on Earth looking up, that was Uranus's realm. And Gaia was the Earth. which kind of makes sense if you think how many religious traditions talk about the Earth Mother and those kind of things. It's something to remember, and it's almost there when, because I've been thinking about this stuff. It kind of comes and goes. It's not really a solid thought that I have, but what these things are in reference to are gods, the gods of the heavens and the gods of the earth. So we're not talking about people. We're talking about gods and what has been assigned to them, what they represent, the powers that they hold, and the place that they serve in our society. And something really that was really fascinating to me that I learned about all of this is, for any of you who have had any exposure to this, when the Israelites were wandering around in the desert for 40 years, everybody knows that story, right? I don't think there's anybody who knows that story. And they stopped in the middle of the desert. It wasn't even the Israelites with Moses, where he got the 10 Commandments off of Mount Sinai, and came down and he found that all the Israelites were all worshipping Baal. Now my recollections of that as a child was that was the worst possible thing that could be done, was this whole Baal worship business. But interestingly, the whole Baal worship business is the Greek mythology and Roman mythology. It's going back to all of those kind of gods. I didn't even realize it. The way that it was portrayed and the way that I understood it, it was a catastrophic thing. But it almost, in my personal thinking about that, is kind of the transition between the old gods and the old way of doing things and the Jewish faith, how all of that comes into being and how all of that factors in together. Anyways, quite a surprising thing is that Uranus and Gaia were brother and sister. Now, this is something that runs through the whole mythology thing, and I don't understand it. I went and had a look, and the closest that I can get to an interpretation of why the gods were brother and sister but also married is going back to perhaps more ancient times, where there was more of a collective society, where all of the children were all looked after by the tribe, and maybe the powerful families and the ruling families wanted to stay in power, and that's how they did it, and it was a very collective society. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Anyways, to start off our story, we've got Uranus and Gaia, and they have their children. Who precedes Uranus and Gaia is Kyrios, which is also sometimes confused with Kronos. Now, anybody who's watched Wrath of the Titans and Clash of the Titans, the movie that came out, is maybe a little bit familiar with these names. But Kyrios is Father Time, the one who came before Uranus. And the depiction is of the old man with the white beard. So, you're talking about an idea it's not a Christian idea of God. This is an idea of God that has been around for a very, very, very long time. And Kyrios gave rise to earth and water. And as part of that, to the ether and chaos, and surprisingly, an egg. And the ether is the rarefied air of the gods. Chaos, obviously, is the primordial ooze of earth and the whole mess of creation before supposedly the gods separated everything. And then this egg. And out of this egg was born, what is the person's? Phanes. Phanes, who was a hermaphrodite who gave birth to the actual gods. So hermaphrodite is male and female. Please, I'm not a doctor or a biologist. I don't understand these things exactly. But gave birth to the actual gods. And then we've got Uranus and Gaia, and they have their children. And their children are Kronos and a couple of others. I can't remember exactly now who was with him. And Kronos wanted to dethrone, it came about that he wanted to dethrone Uranus. Part of it was because what Uranus had done is he had imprisoned Gaia's children. And Gaia's children, this is complicated stuff, it's really but this is just a little bit of the background of what I actually want to talk about. Gaia's children were the Hectonechires and the Cyclopses. And she was pissed off with Uranus for imprisoning them. And her other son, Kronos, convinced him to go to war against Uranus to take over power, because she didn't like the way that he was doing things, and Kronos wanted to be in charge. And the way that this went down is Kronos castrated Uranus and threw his penis in the sea. And that's where Aphrodite comes from. Like I say, I don't really know how all of this stuff fits together. But anyways, obviously Uranus, and then released the other children, the Hectonechires and the Cyclopses. The Hectonechires had like 100 arms and 100 heads, and they were monsters, and they were the ones who would, their weapon, they would throw mountains around at each other. They were extremely strong. And then the Cyclops, and the Cyclops had the one eye. And what Kronos did is he then imprisoned Uranus. But then he also used the Hectonechires and the Cyclopses to be the gods of Uranus. So basically sent them back down to Tartarus. So he imprisoned them as well. And then started making children. He was kind of the ruler. He then became the ruler. He took over Uranus's role. But then he did exactly the same thing that Uranus was doing, and got his wife pissed off with him because he started eating his children. And the way that the myth goes is that he would eat them. He was eating them whole and in a specific order. And this is where Zeus comes into the picture. Now, this is maybe where it gets a little bit more with familiar with stuff that we understand. Is Kronos' children were Zeus, Poseidon, Atlas, Prometheus, and Epimetheus. And he ate Atlas, Prometheus, Epimetheus, Poseidon, but Hera, who was his wife, and Hera is the goddess of fertility who, if you remember, I spoke some time ago about Narcissus, and Hera was quite a vengeful god. Part of her lineage, I can't remember if it was exactly with her, if it was with Aphrodite, was Nemesis. But anyway, she was pissed off with Kronos for doing this, and saved Zeus. And Zeus, she hid Zeus away in a cave, and Zeus was apparently raised by a goat. Another part of the story that doesn't make any sense. He was raised. He was the only one who was saved, and then was helped by Hera to go to war against Kronos. And what he did was he poisoned Eros with some mixture of mustard seeds and beer or something like that, and Kronos started throwing up these children, his children. Surprisingly, Hera tricked Kronos by giving him a stone wrapped up in a blanket to convince him that was Zeus, which he swallowed anyways. He vomited up the stone, which is some monument somewhere in Greece, and all these children came up, and they had this massive war with the gods. So again, in the first instance, it's the son going to war with his father, aided by the mother because she's unhappy about the way things are being run and his desire for power. And then exactly the same thing happens again in the next generation, because from generation to generation, the fathers are doing exactly the same kind of thing. They're imprisoning their children and this was the start of a 10-year battle between the gods on Mount Olympus, which everybody, I'm sure, we're all familiar with Mount Olympus, and the Titans, the gods and the Titans, the war between the gods and the Titans, of which Mount Olympus won that war. And Kronos was sent down into Tartarus, and Zeus, who had used the Cyclopses, the Hector, whatchamacallits, Poseidon, all of these guys, Zeus was the one who led the charge, sent Kronos down into Tartarus to be guarded by the Hectorites and the Cyclopses. And now this is, sorry, I'm just a little bit confused here. On the side of Kronos was Atlas, Prometheus, and Epithemius, the Titans. Zeus was the god who won the day. And as victor, he meted out some punishment towards these people who had tried to, who he had gone to war with. And the one that interested me, and the one that really started me looking at all of this stuff, was Atlas. Now, we all know that an atlas is a map book. It was first named, I don't particularly recall the date, but it was some time ago. The first book of maps that was ever put together was called an atlas. Part of Atlas's punishment for going to war with Zeus. Now, if this whole thing sounds confused to you, this is really confusing to me. Because there are so many resources. I promise you, if you go look at my computer, the amount of pages that are open and the amount of different resources and different materials and all of this stuff, that is there. It's freaking complicated. Now, it also says to me a little bit that a lot of the stuff was like word of mouth. Like, we understand the religious traditions that we grow up in. People have an understanding of the religious traditions that they grow up in and the significance of those kind of things, and how all of this stuff is interrelated. But at the end of the day, Zeus punished Atlas. And the way that Zeus punished Atlas is, everybody I'm sure is very familiar with the statue of Atlas with carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, carrying the globe on his shoulders. Now, what actually transpired there is that Atlas's punishment was that he had to hold the celestial axis on his shoulders for eternity. And if you look a little bit deeper into the significance of something like that, the celestial axis is which the cosmos revolves around. And apparently, as far as the story goes, he was sent off into the west, where he had to go and hold up the celestial axis. And there's also part of the story where there's the Atlas Mountains in North Africa, which apparently, as part of the mythology, everybody knows who Medusa is. Whatever she looked at turned to stone. Someone zapped Atlas with the Medusa's head, and he turned into stone, and those are the Atlas Mountains. The idea behind this is that if you fight or go up against the gods, your punishment is eternal suffering. You will, for an eternity, be destined to hold the weight of the world on your shoulders, which I thought was quite interesting and quite significant. You have to hold the sky up forever if you reject the gods, if you reject Zeus. While other people get to walk around freely, without any worry or without any care. Now, again, what is significant for me is the parallels that I can draw between this kind of thinking, which is thousands of years old, and current thinking. Is that if you don't believe, you are destined to spend an eternity in the fiery pit of hell. So that's not new language. That is not a new idea. When Kronos beat Uranus in the struggle for power, there was apparently a golden age where everybody could do what they wanted and everybody lived how they pleased. And Kronos is always represented with a sickle, and is the god of the harvest. So there's always kind of the promises that if you're gonna do this, you can be free. What is again something that is interesting to me is the way that Baal figures into this kind of thing. Is if you're going to worship those gods, those are the wrong gods to worship. This is the right God to worship. If you're going to be worshiping that God, you're going to be doing things that are going to send you into eternal damnation. But if you worship and believe in the one true God, that is the law and the commandments, and he had the tablets and he spoke to God on the mountain, and things changed. And how much of that is about picking a team? Make sure that you pick the winning team. Make sure that you back the winning horse in the race, so that you've got the best chance of not losing out in this debacle, ending up like Atlas, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders for an eternity. And as the myths progress, in some of the myths, Hercules builds some pillars to help free Atlas from his burden. There are a few other ways of looking at the whole thing. Prometheus, any science fiction fans? Prometheus, not one science fiction fan here. Am I the only one? There was a very, very excellent science fiction movie called Prometheus that was released. It was, and I hate to say it, probably episode 7 of the Alien series. But it was very good, and I really, really enjoyed it with Sigourney Weaver. She was fantastic in that film. Prometheus and Epimetheus. There was the flood myth comes into this whole thing again, where the whole world was wiped out of people. And they had to make people again, and Prometheus and Epimetheus were given the job of doing this whole thing. And Epimetheus was told that he had to give all the positive traits and attributes to all the animals in the world, which he started doing. But by the time he had gotten to humans, he had run out of positive traits to give to humans. And in Greek mythology, Epimetheus, and I'd never heard of Epimetheus. I'd heard of Prometheus, but I'd never heard of Epimetheus. Epimetheus was kind of viewed as a little bit of a simpleton, not really that much of a valuable deity, as a little bit foolish. The idea being here is that doing work without any forethought as to what it is that you are doing. So in our society, something that I've spoken a little bit about, if you look at, there's a law called the hagiographical law, which works along the lines of what we need to do is we need more production. We need to produce more meat for our society, and it doesn't matter what happens. We're not thinking about the impact that is having on an environment, or on society, or on the globe, or anything like that. It's just go, produce. So, no forethought, no thinking about what it is that you are doing. Production, materialism. The thinking comes after the creation of. Unfortunately, Epimetheus got married to Pandora. Pandora was given to him as a gift by one of the gods as his wife, and he married Pandora. And everybody, I'm sure, is a little bit familiar with the story of Pandora's box, and which she had, apparently it was a jar, Pandora's jar, and when she opened the jar, and the things that came out were evil, hard work, and disease. That was what was in Pandora's box. Those are the things that escaped. The one thing that stayed in was hope, which is quite an interesting thought. Anyways, at the end of the day, the humans were left with no positive attributes because Epimetheus had gotten way ahead of himself and was just like in production mode and not thinking about anything, and by the time it got to us, there was nothing left. And that's where Prometheus comes in. And Prometheus is portrayed as a little bit of a trickster of the gods, and what he did is he went and stole fire from the gods and gave the humans fire. And that was quite interesting, because if you look purely at when food started to be cooked, by us as humans, how much of a huge impact it had on us. You could say almost the birth of civilization started when we learned how to cook food. We didn't have to work so hard. When you cook our food, it's got higher calorie values. Life became a lot easier for us when we started doing that. If you believe in evolution. Obviously, if you're a creationist, and what the creationists have done is they've added up all the dates and the timelines in the Bible. And they are saying that when the Bible says that the earth started, was 5,000 years ago. So if you're a creationist and you believe that the earth started 5,000 years ago, then you don't believe in evolution. And that's a whole different argument. Me, in my personal capacity, that's a bit crazy. It's a little bit insane. But anyways, that's just me. So another interpretation of the gift that Prometheus gave humans was actually the fire of creativity. So if we're looking at the two brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus, Prometheus was given creativity. He was given forethought. Epimetheus was given hindsight, looking at things after they've already happened. 20/20 vision, perfect vision, after everything's been done and after everything's been messed up and after everything has happened, then looking and thinking about it, as opposed to Prometheus, who is giving humans creative thoughts, arts, for science, for civilization. But he was also punished. He was also punished for going to war with the gods. And this, to me, was possibly the most interesting thing of this whole saga. His punishment for eternity is that he was chained to a rock. And every day, an eagle would fly down and eat his liver. That was his punishment. And then at the end of the day, the eagle would fly away. During the night, his liver would regenerate, and then the next day the eagle would be back there again and eat his liver. And in ancient times, in these times, the liver was thought to be the seat of all emotions. I don't know where the liver is, I suppose somewhere over here. So for an eternity, because he gave humans creativity and creative thought and forethought, he was destined to have his liver eaten. These things are all metaphors. And we're all quite happy to accept them as stories because we know that Greek mythology is just that, Greek mythology. But to a very large degree, people base their societies on these kind of mythologies. This stuff that I'm talking about now, the difference between foresight and the difference between hindsight, and Atlas's punishment of, because he rejected the gods, suffering an eternal punishment, are very useful and very helpful concepts. If I just think about just today, the preparation and the thinking about what it is that I wanted to speak to you about today, as opposed to doing nothing and just coming in here and just, because I can do that as well. I can come in here and I can just talk. I like the sound of my own voice. I don't mind talking. I can come in here and I can make up stuff. Two completely different ways of approaching any kind of problem. Now, the one is taking no responsibility, accepting to a degree what is happening to you, not in its entirety, because when we're in those situations that we're describing in Epimetheus with the hindsight is, why am I landing up in these situations? Why is this happening to me? Why is this being done to me? As opposed to thinking about things, putting a little bit of forethought and a little bit of effort into things. In essence, taking responsibility for things. Now, there's not one person in the world who can say to another person, all you need to do is just learn to be responsible and take care of your things and everything is going to be fine. Because we wouldn't be sitting here in rehab if that was the case. The reason that I ended up in alcoholism and ended up having to get into recovery, and getting into recovery wasn't even my choice. It was through luck and circumstances that happened, through no decision or no choice of mine. I'll tell you right now, the only reason that I went to my first meeting was to get out of a court case. That was the only reason that I went to that meeting. So it wasn't because I wanted to learn how to take responsibility. I had no idea how to take responsibility for anything. And this is where Atlas comes into the story. Now, my personal experience around this has been very fraught with confusion and misunderstanding and not wanting to participate in any kind of, like I mentioned, picking a team. I do not want to belong to a team. I don't want to belong to the Christian team. I don't want to belong to the Buddhist team. I don't want to belong to the Jewish team. I don't want to belong to the atheist team. I don't want to belong to a team. Why do I have to back aside? But if we look at the stuff objectively, and just take a chance and not reject all the information that's out there. All these people can't be wrong. There's a lot of misguided, misinterpretations, misunderstanding about all of the stuff. But to just outright reject it as rubbish and a complete waste of time that serves absolutely no purpose. My personal experience has shown me that it puts me in that exact same position as Atlas was in. Having to bear the celestial axis for an eternity of pain and suffering. The answers are there if we are willing to look and see and take a chance to see if there is some sense in any of this, even if it is just as a story, as a myth.